Behind the city's richest street, a white dog was crying in the snow. 3 men in black were dragging him toward a truck while everyone else looked away. Declan Ward, a former Navy SEAL, stopped his old pickup and stepped into the alley. Beside him stood Havoc, his loyal German shepherd, calm but ready. The dog's name was Sterling, and he belonged to a mansion that had failed to protect him. That night, Declan didn't just save a wounded dog. He opened the door to a family's grief, a betrayal hidden behind wealth, and a choice only Sterling could make. Thank God for the quiet moments when He places us where someone needs us most. Where are you watching from tonight? Like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and give us strength to keep writing more stories like this. Declan Ward knew places like this were built to make people forget the cold. The street glittered beneath a soft fall of winter snow, every restaurant window burning gold, every hotel entrance framed by polished brass and expensive stone. Black cars idled along the curb. Men in tailored coats stepped around slush without looking down. Women in evening dresses crossed beneath heated awnings, laughing softly as if the season itself had been hired to decorate the night. Declan's old pickup looked out of place among them. The truck rolled past a wine lounge, then a boutique hotel, then the glowing front of a private club called the Gilded Room. Its sign was written in thin gold letters above a black door, guarded by 2 men who looked less like hosts than warnings. Declan did not slow for them. He had no interest in the kind of room where money made men louder and guilt made them generous. He was only passing through. A repaired generator control unit sat in a cardboard box on the passenger side floor. He had promised to drop it off for an old friend who worked maintenance nearby, and then he would take the back road home, where the city lights thinned out and the snow looked clean again. Beside him, Havoc sat upright in the passenger seat. And the German shepherd was 7 years old, broad-chested and dark-coated, with tan markings above eyes that missed very little. He had the stillness of a dog trained by life rather than command. Declan trusted that stillness. In the years after the Navy, when sleep became unreliable and silence sometimes sounded too much like waiting, Havoc had learned how to bring him back without noise. A muzzle against his hand, a shift of weight against his leg, a quiet reminder that the war was no longer in the room. At the red light beside the Gilded Room, Havoc's ears lifted. Declan noticed before the sound reached him. And the dog's body changed first, spine straightening, head turning slightly toward the alley behind the club. Not alarm, not fear, recognition of something wrong. Declan turned down the radio. For a moment, there was only the softened hum of traffic and the faint scrape of tires over wet snow. Then it came again. A dog's cry. Small, strangled, cut short. Declan's hand tightened on the steering wheel. He had heard men make sounds like that when they were trying not to beg. He had heard animals make them when they already knew no mercy was coming. The sound did not belong on this bright street, but that was how these things often worked. Pain did not announce itself under spotlights. It slipped behind buildings, behind locked doors, behind places where people had learned not to look. The light turned green. The car behind him tapped its horn. Declan did not move. Another sound followed the cry, male laughter, rough and pleased with itself. Havoc gave a low growl. Declan eased the truck forward, not down the main street but toward the delivery lane behind the club. He did not rush. Rushing got people killed. Rushing made anger feel like courage. He pulled beside a snowbank near the alley mouth, killed the engine, and left the dash camera running. Then he took out his phone. "This is Ward," he said when Sheriff Owen Callahan answered. Back alley behind the Gilded Room. Possible animal assault. 3 men, maybe more. I'm recording. Owen said something sharp on the other end, but Declan had already lowered the phone and set it to record. He stepped out into the snow. The cold hit his face clean and immediate. The alley was darker than the street, washed in a sick blue light from a rear service door. A box truck sat near the far wall with its back doors open. 3 men stood around something on the ground. They were large men, built heavy under leather jackets, the kind who use size before words. One had blood on his hand and anger in his face. Another held a length of nylon lead. And the third laughed as if the whole thing were an inconvenience. Between them was a dog, white. Even through mud, blood, and melted snow, the dog's coat caught what little light the alley had. A Samoyed, Declan thought, beautiful in a way that felt almost obscene in that place. Its thick fur was dragged flat along one side, its shoulders stained red, its body low to the ground as if it had learned that standing only invited another blow. A leather collar hung crooked around its neck, expensive and dark against the white fur. A silver tag flashed when the dog trembled. Sterling. The name was engraved in clean letters. One of the men jerked the lead. Get up, you little rich man's rug." The dog tried. Its front paws slid on the wet concrete. The man with the bleeding hand raised his boot. Declan reached back into the truck and switched on the high beams. White light flooded the alley. All three men froze. For a second, the place became too visible. The open truck, the dog on the ground, the blood on the snow, the boot still raised. Declan walked into the light with Havoc at his left side. The German shepherd did not lunge. He did not bark. He moved with controlled weight, shoulder level with Declan's knee, eyes fixed on the men. The one with the bleeding hand turned first. "Keep walking, old man." Declan stopped 10 feet away. He was 45, broad through the shoulders, wearing a dark winter jacket over work clothes that still smelled faintly of engine oil. There was gray beginning at his temples and a scar near his jaw that the alley light caught when he shifted his head. And he did not look like a man hunting trouble. He looked like a man who had spent years learning exactly how much trouble cost. "That dog yours?" Declan asked. The man laughed. "Tonight it is." The Samoyed lifted its head at the sound of Declan's voice. Not much, just enough for him to see its eyes. That was the moment something in him changed. Not anger. Anger had arrived already. This was older. He remembered a snowfield in another country, the radio breaking up, a man calling his name from somewhere white and impossible to reach. He remembered being ordered back. He remembered obeying. He remembered surviving it. The dog's eyes held that same terrible question. "Are you leaving too?" Declan's jaw tightened. "Camera's running," he said. "Sheriff's on the way. Let the dog go." The man with the lead spat into the snow. "This isn't your dog." Declan looked down at Sterling, shivering against the concrete, then back at him. "Not yet," he said, "but if you touch it again, this becomes mine." The bleeding man moved first. He came fast, too confident, throwing a heavy punch meant to end the conversation. Declan stepped inside it, turned his shoulder, caught the wrist, and used the man's own momentum to drive him into the side of a metal dumpster. The impact rang through the alley. The man dropped hard, gasping, more shocked than injured. The Havoc shifted forward once. The second man took one look at the German shepherd and changed his mind about closing the distance. Declan did not advance. That mattered. He could feel the old part of himself waking, the part that knew how to finish men quickly and without remorse. Havoc brushed his muzzle against Declan's hand, just once. Declan breathed. He kept his voice level. "Back away from the dog." Sirens rose somewhere beyond the main street. The third man cursed and bolted toward the far end of the alley. The second hesitated, still gripping the lead. He gave it one last cruel yank, trying to drag Sterling toward the truck. Havoc stepped between them. No bark, no attack. And just a wall of muscle, teeth barely showing, eyes steady enough to make the man understand he had run out of easy choices. He dropped the lead and ran. Declan waited until the alley cleared before he knelt. Sterling shrank from him at once, pressing its body into the dirty snow, trembling so hard the silver tag clicked against the collar. Declan did not reach straight for its head. He knew better. Pain made every hand look like the last hand. "It's all right," he said quietly, though he knew those words rarely meant anything at first. He removed his jacket slowly and laid it over the dog's back. Sterling flinched beneath the weight, then went still. The Havoc lowered himself several feet away, chin near his paws, making himself smaller than he was. The Samoyed's eyes moved from Declan to Havoc. Something eased, not trust, not yet, but the smallest pause in fear. Declan slid one arm beneath the dog's chest and the other behind its hindquarters. Sterling stiffened, then gave a faint, broken sound that made Declan's throat close. He lifted carefully, surprised by how light the dog felt beneath all that beautiful fur. By the time he reached the truck, blue and red lights were washing over the snow behind him. As Declan settled Sterling onto the back seat, Havoc climbed in and lay beside the injured dog without touching it, his body angled between Sterling and the open door. Declan looked once toward the end of the street. A black luxury car sat half hidden beyond the glow of a hotel awning. Its windows were tinted. Its engine was running. No one stepped out. No one called for the dog. No one asked if it was alive. Then the car pulled away, smooth and silent, disappearing into the golden traffic as if it had never been there. Declan closed the truck door. Inside, Sterling shook beneath his old jacket. Havoc stayed close, steady as a promise. And Declan drove away from the bright street, carrying with him a dog that did not yet know it had been saved. The clinic lights were too white for the hour. They made the blood on Sterling's fur look darker, the mud on his legs harsher, the tremor in his body impossible to ignore. Outside, snow drifted past the front windows of Monroe Veterinary Care, soft and almost peaceful beneath the street lamps. Inside, everything smelled of antiseptic, wet dog, and quiet urgency. Declan carried Sterling through the door with Havoc close behind him. A woman in navy scrubs came out from the back before the bell above the entrance had finished ringing. "Doctor." Elise Monroe was in her early 40s, compact and sharp-eyed, with her dark hair pinned carelessly behind her head and the expression of someone who had been pulled from sleep too many times to waste words. She knew Declan well enough not to ask useless questions. "What happened?" she said. "Men behind the gilded room," Declan answered. "They were trying to force him into a truck." Elise's eyes moved to the dog in his arms. Something hardened in her face, but her hands stayed gentle. "Put him on the table." Sterling stiffened the moment Declan lowered him. His paws slipped against the metal surface. And he tried to curl inward, not from aggression, but from a kind of fear that had already run out of places to hide. When Elise reached toward his shoulder, he jerked back so violently that Declan instinctively lifted a hand. Havoc stepped forward once, not threatening, just present. Sterling saw him, and the panic in his body paused. It did not disappear. It simply missed a beat. Elise noticed. "Good," she murmured. "Let him see your dog. Don't crowd him." Declan stood near the table, but did not touch Sterling unless Elise asked him to. That was harder than it should have been. In the alley, action had been simple. Light, distance, voice, movement. And here, under the clinic lights, rescue became something slower and more difficult. A wounded animal did not understand that hands could change sides. The body remembered faster than the mind could be convinced. Elise examined him with patient efficiency, bruising along the shoulder, a raw mark around the neck where a lead had been pulled too hard, one front leg strained, likely from being dragged or twisted, no broken ribs that she could feel, though she warned Declan that x-rays would tell more. The dog's heart was racing, but not failing. His breathing was shallow, but steady. "What worries me most," she said, lowering her voice, "isn't just tonight." Declan looked at her. Elise pointed to the skin beneath the thick white fur near Sterling's collar line. "This isn't all new. Some of this irritation is older. And watch him when I move my sleeve." She shifted her arm. The dark fabric of her jacket brushed near the table. Sterling flinched hard. Declan's eyes narrowed. "He reacts to black coats," Elise said. "Men more than women, but the coat matters. That tells me tonight may not be the first time he saw someone dressed like those men." Sterling's silver tag clicked softly against the table as he trembled. The name caught Elise's attention. "Sterling," she read. She turned the tag over, then moved to the scanner mounted near the wall. A moment later, the chip number appeared on her screen. Elise typed, waited, and then her expression changed in a way Declan did not like. "What?" he asked. She leaned closer to the monitor. "Registered owner, Vivian Ashborne." Declan knew the name, even though he had never moved in circles that said it with familiarity. Everyone in the city knew Ashborne. Real estate, hotels, private foundations, a family whose money had its own weather. Elise continued reading. "Secondary household contact, Ashborne Estate, emergency number listed under Graham Pell." "Not Richard Ashborne?" "No." Elise's mouth tightened. "Graham Pell? Estate manager." She called the number on speaker while Sterling lay shaking beneath a warm towel. It rang 4 times before a man answered. His voice was smooth, formal, and cold enough to belong in a marble hallway. "Graham Pell speaking." "This is Dr. Elise Monroe at Monroe Veterinary Care. I have a dog here registered to Vivian Ashborne, a white Samoyed named Sterling. He was found injured tonight." There was the smallest pause, not shock, not relief, a pause for calculation. "I see," the man said. "The family will send someone to retrieve the property." Declan looked up. Elise did too. "The dog is injured," she said carefully. "He needs treatment and observation. And I also need to know when he went missing and who last had custody of him." "The family will discuss that with the proper authorities," Graham Pell replied. "Please keep the animal contained until our representative arrives." The animal. The property. Sterling lay inches away, eyes open, body trembling beneath a towel that could not warm whatever had gone cold inside him. Declan stepped closer to the phone. "This is Declan Ward," he said. "I found him." Another pause. "Mr. Ward," Graham said, and somehow made the name sound like a file being opened. "Then I suggest you allow the family to handle its own affairs." Declan's voice stayed even. Funny thing, the dog didn't look like he was being handled. He looked like he was being taken. Elise ended the call before either man could sharpen the next sentence. For a moment, the clinic was silent except for Sterling's breathing. Then Sheriff Owen Callahan arrived, bringing cold air and the smell of wet wool in with him. He was a broad man in his mid-50s, with silver in his mustache and tired eyes that had seen enough local trouble to distrust anything too clean. And he listened while Declan gave his statement, then watched the dashcam footage without interrupting. By the end, Owen rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Those boys work around the Gilded Room," he said. "Not officially. Nothing about that place is ever official." Elise handed him her preliminary notes. "Sterling shouldn't be released tonight. Not medically and not legally. If those men were moving him, someone authorized it or someone stole him. Either way, he's evidence." Owen looked at Declan. "You willing to keep him at your place if Dr. Monroe signs off? Clinic's not set up for overnight trauma boarding right now." Declan glanced at Sterling. The easy answer would have been no. Well, he had a quiet house for a reason. One dog, one routine, one life narrow enough to manage. Then Sterling shifted under the towel and looked toward Havoc, not toward any of the humans, not trusting, choosing the least frightening thing in the room. Declan exhaled. "Yeah," he said, "I'll take him." By the time they reached Declan's house, the snow had thinned to a fine silver dust. The house sat back from the road, low and plain, with a porch light that threw a warm circle across the steps. Havoc jumped down first and waited. Sterling would not leave the truck. Declan opened the back door and stood aside. He didn't reach in. He didn't coax. He simply waited with the patience of a man who had once learned that pressure could break what pain had not. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Sterling placed one paw on the edge of the seat. His body shook. He withdrew. Tried again. This time Havoc walked to the porch, lay down at the threshold, and rested his head on his paws. Sterling watched him. Slowly, painfully, the white dog climbed down. He made it as far as the first porch step and stopped. Declan set a bowl of water near the door, then a folded blanket, then food. He backed away and left the door open. Warm light spilled across the porch, but no one forced Sterling into it. Inside, Declan sat on the couch without turning on the television. Havoc lay between the doorway and the room, his body angled so he could see both Declan and Sterling. Hours moved quietly. Sterling did not eat while anyone watched. He did not sleep. Every passing car made him lift his head. Every settling creak of the house ran through his body like warning. Declan stayed awake longer than he meant to. He had brought men back before, some breathing, some not. He knew the terrible waiting that came after rescue, when the world expected gratitude, but the rescued person could only feel the shape of what had almost happened. Near dawn, Sterling lowered his head and drank. Only once. But Declan did not move. Havoc's tail gave one slow tap against the floor. Morning came pale and cold. The black luxury car arrived at 9. A man stepped out wearing a long charcoal overcoat, polished shoes, and black leather gloves. He was older than Declan had expected, perhaps early 60s, narrow-faced and carefully composed, with silver hair combed back so neatly it looked disciplined. He carried a leather folder under one arm and looked at Declan's small house as if measuring its worth and finding it unfortunate. "Mr. Ward?" he said. "Graham Pell." Declan stood on the porch. "Well, I know who you are." "I've come for Sterling." At the sound of the name, the white dog rose inside the doorway. Then he saw Graham. The change was immediate. Sterling backed into the corner so fast the water bowl tipped. His injured legs slipped. He made no sound, but the terror in him filled the room more loudly than a bark could have. Havoc stood, not with rage, with certainty. He placed himself between Graham Pell and the open door. Graham's eyes flicked to the German shepherd, then to Declan. This is unnecessary. No, Declan said. That reaction was necessary. You just didn't want anyone to see it. Graham's mouth tightened. You are interfering with a private family matter. Sheriff says it's evidence in an active investigation. Dr. Monroe says it's under medical hold. I have ownership documents. You can show them to Callahan. For the first time, the polished calm cracked. Not much, only enough for Declan to see the man beneath the manners. You have no idea what you are stepping into. Declan looked past him toward the black car idling in the snow. Maybe not. Graham turned to leave, but as he did, his gaze moved through the doorway and stopped on the collar resting on the small table near the wall. Sterling's collar. The dark leather one with the silver tag. The look lasted less than a second, but Declan saw it. Graham Pell had come for the dog, but not only the dog. Declan stepped back into the house and closed the door before the cold could reach Sterling again. Now people were knocking. Dogs were breathing in the hall. The dead had left messages in silver collars. His phone rang. Unknown number. Declan answered without speaking. A man's voice came through, smooth, young, and cold. "Mr. Ward," he said. "This is Preston Ashborne." Declan looked toward the hall. Sterling had lifted his head. Havoc was already awake. "You're holding something that belongs to my family," Preston said. Declan watched Sterling shift closer to Havoc, not hiding this time, but choosing where to stand. "No," Declan said. "I'm holding something your family failed to protect." The line went quiet. Now then Preston laughed softly, as if Declan had disappointed him by being predictable. "That mistake will cost you." Declan ended the call. In the hallway, Sterling lowered his head again, but he did not tremble. That felt like an answer. Elise leaned against the counter, listening. Declan stayed silent. Martha's gloves twisted together. 3 days before Sterling disappeared, I saw Mr. Preston trying to remove his collar. Sterling backed under the library table and bared his teeth. I'd never seen him do that before, not with family. "Why didn't you report it?" Declan asked. Martha lowered her eyes. "To whom?" Graham said the dog was being sent for behavioral training. Mr. Richard wasn't taking visitors. Staff who asked questions lost hours. Some lost jobs. She swallowed. I told myself I was waiting until I had proof. Truth is, I was scared. The words did not excuse anything, but they sounded honest. And Sterling, still behind Havoc, took one step toward Martha, then stopped. Martha saw it and pressed a hand to her mouth. Declan looked at the white dog, then at the collar in the evidence bag. Something about the house, the dog, the dead woman, and Graham's eyes on that collar formed a shape he did not like. He called Sheriff Callahan. Owen arrived an hour later with a small evidence kit and the weary patience of a man who knew procedures mattered most when everyone wanted to skip them. He photographed the collar again, documented the seal, and opened the silver tag with a thin tool while Elise watched. No key fell out. No tiny drive. No hidden jewel. And only a narrow strip of waterproof paper, folded so tightly it seemed impossible it had survived there. Owen unfolded it with gloved hands. On it were 2 lines, written in neat blue ink. Clara Whitman. If anything happens, bring Sterling. No one spoke for a moment. The sentence was simple, almost gentle. But it carried the weight of a woman who had known something was wrong and had trusted a dog with the message because she could no longer trust the people around her. Declan felt the anger in him settle into something colder. Martha began to cry silently. Elise touched her shoulder. "Who is Clara Whitman?" "Mrs. Ashbourne's attorney," Martha said. "Private?" "Not the family's corporate lawyers. Hers." Owen looked at Declan. "We do this clean. No charging into the estate. No confrontation with Preston. We call Whitman." Clara Whitman agreed to meet them that afternoon in her office above a quiet bookstore downtown. She was in her late 50s, tall and spare, with silver blonde hair cut at her jaw and reading glasses she never seemed to need. Her office had no flash to it, only shelves of legal binders, framed botanical prints, and a photograph of Vivian Ashborne kneeling beside Sterling in a garden full of winter roses. When Owen placed the strip of paper on Clara's desk, the attorney didn't touch it at first. She closed her eyes. "I told her not to wait," Clara said. Declan stood near the window, watching snow collect on the bookstore awning below. Clara explained carefully. Vivian had been preparing a supplemental directive before her death. A portion of her personal estate was to be moved into an independent animal protection fund. More importantly, she had requested a private audit of several charitable channels and entertainment properties tied to Preston's management, including the Gilded Room. She believed money was being moved under the cover of philanthropy, Clara said, but she died before the final signatures. And without proof that she intended to proceed immediately, Preston's attorneys buried the matter in procedural objections. "And Sterling?" Elise asked. Clara looked toward the photograph. Vivian used to say Sterling knew who came into a room with love and who came in wanting something. Near the end, she became afraid that if anything happened to her, the dog would be removed before anyone could question what she had been working on. "So the collar doesn't prove everything," Declan said. "No," Clara replied, "but it proves Vivian created an emergency instruction outside the family's control. That matters." It mattered enough that when Declan returned home, the house no longer felt like the edge of the story. It felt like the place where the story had been carried for safekeeping. Sterling was asleep near the hallway, not beside Havoc, but closer than before. When Declan entered, the white dog opened his eyes. He didn't rise. He didn't run. Declan removed his boots quietly. Later, after Elise left and Owen promised to dig into the Gilded Room, Declan stood in the kitchen making coffee he did not really want. The house had changed in 3 days. There were bandage wrappers in the trash, dog bowls set in careful distances, Martha's phone number written on a notepad, and a sealed evidence receipt on the counter. For years, Declan had kept his life narrow so nothing could enter without permission. By the 3rd morning, Sterling had stopped shaking every time the furnace clicked on. That was not trust, not yet. It was only the body learning that some sounds did not lead to pain. Declan understood the difference. People like to call recovery a turning point, as if the wounded crossed one clean line and became whole again. In truth, it came in smaller measurements, a dog drinking while a man stood in the room, a breath that did not catch at every passing car, a head that lifted without fear when another dog moved nearby. Sterling still would not come to Declan when called. Declan did not call him. He let Havoc do what words could not. And the German Shepherd moved through the house with quiet certainty, never crowding the white dog, never taking his food, never forcing closeness. If Havoc lay near the hall, Sterling chose the far side of the rug. If Havoc stood to drink, Sterling watched, waited, then followed a minute later. It was not friendship yet. It was permission. Dr. Elise Monroe came twice that day, bringing fresh bandages, medication, and the kind of calm that made Declan's small kitchen feel less like a place meant for one person. She examined Sterling on a blanket instead of a table this time. He tolerated it better with Havoc lying beside the couch. He's not just afraid of being hurt," Elise said, wrapping the shoulder with practiced hands. "He's afraid of being taken." Declan looked toward the collar resting inside a clear evidence bag on his counter. Sheriff Callahan had left it there only after photographing and logging it, with strict instructions not to tamper with anything. "Graham wanted that collar," Declan said. Elise followed his gaze. "Then let Owen open it properly." "That tag look unusual to you?" "Expensive," she said. "Custom made, but rich people put stranger things on dogs than silver." Before Declan could answer, gravel crunched outside. Havoc rose first. Sterling lifted his head, body tightening. And Declan stepped to the window and saw an old green Subaru parked near the mailbox. A woman climbed out slowly, boots sinking into the snow. She wore a faded canvas coat, wool gloves, and a knit hat pulled low over gray hair. She looked around before approaching the porch, not like someone lost, but like someone afraid of being seen in the right place. Declan opened the door before she knocked. "Mr. Ward?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but not weak. Her face was lined from weather more than age, and her eyes had the directness of people who spent more time with soil and animals than with polite rooms. "Who's asking?" "Martha Keene. And I work the grounds at the Ashborne estate." At the name, Sterling gave a low sound from behind Declan. Not fear exactly, something closer to recognition. Martha's eyes softened when she saw him. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. Sterling didn't come forward, but he didn't retreat either. That was enough to make Declan step aside. Martha stood just inside the door, careful not to move too quickly. She smelled faintly of pine, cold air, and greenhouse dirt. Her gaze stayed on Sterling, but she spoke to Declan. Vivian loved that dog more than she trusted most people in that house. The name changed the room. And Vivian Ashborne had existed to Declan only as a file entry and a dead woman in old headlines. Martha made her real without trying. She spoke of a woman who walked the garden paths in winter with Sterling pressed against her side, who carried biscuits in the pocket of a cashmere coat, who remembered the names of the old rescue dogs at town shelters, even when cameras were not present. After Mrs. Ashborne died, Martha said, Sterling slept outside her bedroom door for weeks, wouldn't eat unless Mr. Richard sat near him. Then Mr. Richard stopped coming downstairs as often. Grief got its hands around him. After that, Mr. Preston and Graham started deciding what the house needed. Ashborne House looked untouched by winter. Snow lay across the lawns in smooth white sheets, trimmed by lanterns and the dark ribs of old pine trees. The mansion rose beyond the gates with every window lit, its stone walls glowing warm against the cold. From the road, it looked less like a home than a promise people paid money to believe in. Declan sat behind the wheel of his truck and looked at it for a moment before turning off the engine. Beside him, Havoc watched the front doors. Sterling lay in the back seat on a folded blanket. Elise had cleaned his coat as much as she could without stressing him, and the white fur had come back bright in places, soft as new snow. Joe, but nothing could hide the bandage at his shoulder or the way his body tightened each time a black car moved near the entrance. Dr. Elise Monroe stepped out of her own vehicle carrying a medical file under one arm. Her usual scrubs were hidden beneath a dark wool coat, but she still looked more like someone prepared to stop bleeding than make conversation. Sheriff Owen Callahan arrived next, not in uniform, but with his badge clipped inside his jacket and the calm irritation of a man who disliked rich houses pretending they had different laws. Clara Whitman was already waiting near the gate. She wore a gray coat buttoned to the throat, her silver blonde hair tucked behind one ear. And in one gloved hand she held a slim leather folder. In the other, nothing. She didn't need much to look prepared. No speeches, Clara said as Declan approached. I wasn't planning one. No accusations in the foyer, no threats, no grabbing Preston by the collar, however satisfying that might be. Owen gave Declan a sideways glance. She's talking to you. Declan looked toward the mansion. Through the tall windows, he could see people moving beneath chandeliers, glasses in hand, faces turned toward framed photographs of Vivian Ashborne. The evening had been announced as a winter charity reception for animal welfare. There were reporters near the front steps, donors in polished shoes, and enough soft music leaking through the doors to make the whole place feel civilized. That was what bothered Declan most. The place did not look guilty. Clara lowered her voice. We are here so Richard Ashborne sees Sterling with his own eyes. After that, I ask him to reopen Vivian's private file. If Preston makes this public, we let him. If he keeps his mask on, we let that speak too. Elise opened the rear door of Declan's truck. Sterling did not move at first, his eyes fixed on the mansion. He knew this place. And not the way a dog knew a scent on the wind, but the way a body knew where it had once waited for someone who never came back. Havoc jumped down first and stood beside the truck. Only then did Sterling rise. He stepped onto the snow carefully, shoulder stiff, head low. For a moment, Declan thought he would refuse to go farther. Then Havoc moved one pace forward and stopped, giving Sterling the choice to follow. Sterling followed. Inside, Ashborne House smelled of cedar garlands, expensive candles, and warm wine. Guests turned when the doors opened. At first, they noticed Declan because he did not belong among them. And his dark coat was plain, his boots still carried snow, and his face held none of the soft social expressions people wore in rooms like this. Then they saw Sterling. The conversation thinned. The Samoyed's white coat should have matched the room's carefully arranged beauty. Instead, the bandage on his shoulder made the beauty feel dishonest. He was not an image for a donation brochure. He was a living accusation standing under a chandelier. A woman near the champagne table whispered Vivian's name. Preston Ashborne crossed the room before the silence could settle too deeply. And he was younger than Declan had expected, mid-30s, clean-shaven, handsome in the expensive way that came from never needing to look tired. His tuxedo fit perfectly. His smile did too, but when his eyes landed on Sterling, something hard moved behind them before the smile returned. Mr. Ward, Preston said warmly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. This is quite an entrance. Declan said nothing. Preston's gaze shifted to Elise, then Owen, then Clara. "And you brought company." Clara gave him a polite nod. "Good evening, Preston." His smile cooled by a degree. "Ms. Whitman, I wasn't aware you were invited." "Vivian invited me years ago," Clara said. I'm simply late." A few guests looked at each other, unsure whether they had heard an insult or a joke. Preston recovered quickly. "If this is about the dog, the family appreciates Mr. Ward's concern, but Sterling is home now. We can handle things privately from here." Sterling backed half a step. It was not dramatic. No growl, no bark, just one small movement away from Preston. Declan saw Richard Ashborne before anyone announced him. The old man stood at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the banister. He was tall but diminished, dressed formally in black, his white hair slightly uncombed as if someone had prepared him for the evening, but could not make him fully present. His face carried grief, not as an expression, but as a permanent weathering. He had been looking at the crowd. Then he saw Sterling. The change in him was painful to watch. His hand tightened on the banister, his mouth opened slightly, but no sound came at first. The room seemed to lean with him as he began descending the stairs, step by careful step. "Sterling," he said. The dog lifted his head. For one suspended second, Declan saw what might have been a dog running across polished floors, an old man kneeling, grief meeting grief without words. But Sterling did not run. He stayed between Declan and Havoc, trembling just enough for the lights to catch the movement in his fur. Richard stopped 3 steps from the bottom. His eyes moved to the bandage, to the way Sterling held his shoulder, to the fear in a dog that should have recognized home. "What happened to him?" Richard asked. Preston was already beside him. "Father, please." "There was an incident. Mr. Ward involved himself before we had all the facts." Richard did not look at Preston. "I asked what happened to him." Elise stepped forward, opening her file. "He was found injured behind the gilded room 2 nights ago. His wounds are consistent with being restrained, dragged, and struck. Some stress indicators appear older." The room went very still. Preston's voice sharpened beneath the polish. "This is hardly the place for medical theater." "No," Clara said. "It's exactly the place. You invited half the city here to raise money in Vivian's name." That name did what accusation could not. Richard turned toward Clara. "You have something to tell me." "Yes," Clara said. "Privately, if you choose. But it concerns Vivian's last instructions." Behind Preston, Graham Pell stood near the edge of the room, rigid in his black suit. He had the expression of a man holding a glass too tightly and hoping no one noticed his hand shaking. His eyes kept moving, not to Sterling's wound, not to Richard's face, but to the sealed evidence pouch Owen carried beneath his coat. Sterling saw Graham, his body lowered. Havoc stepped forward, not with violence, with decision. He placed himself between Graham and Sterling, broad head lowered, eyes fixed. Graham stopped moving at once. And that small moment did more damage than shouting could have. Several guests turned. Owen saw it. Clara saw it. Richard saw it too. Then a voice came from near the service hall. "It wasn't a training trip." Martha Keene stood there in a plain, dark dress that did not belong among silk and pearls. Her gray hair was pinned back, and her hands were clasped in front of her, as if she had to hold herself steady. She looked terrified, but she didn't step back. "Graham took Sterling out under Mr. Preston's order," she said. "He told staff the dog needed correction. Mrs. Vivian never would have allowed that collar off him. Never." Preston's face changed, only for a moment. But the room saw it. The flash of fury beneath the practiced grief, the insult of being challenged by a gardener in front of donors. "You should be very careful," Preston said softly. Richard turned to his son. The old man suddenly looked less frail. "No," Richard said. "You should." No one moved. Then Richard faced the guests, the reporters, the polished circle of people who had come to admire their own generosity. "This reception is over," he said. A murmur spread through the room. Preston took a step toward him. "Father." "Sheriff Callahan," Richard continued, his voice uneven but clear. "You will have access to whatever records you need concerning the Gilded Room, my son's office, and any staff movement involving Sterling." Owen nodded once. "I'll make that official." Graham's face had gone gray. Preston did not confess. He did not break down. Men like him did not collapse in public if they could help it. But the mask had cracked, and behind it, everyone had glimpsed something ugly enough to remember. Richard came down the last few steps. He did not reach for Sterling. He stopped at a respectful distance, then slowly lowered himself to one knee. And the movement seemed to cost him, not physically alone, but in pride, in grief, in the knowledge of what he had failed to see. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was meant for the dog, but the room heard it. "I was in this house," Richard whispered, "and I didn't see what was happening inside it." Sterling looked at him. The dog did not run into his arms, but he did not hide behind Havoc either. He stood in the bright center of the room, wounded and afraid, while the house that had once owned him finally began to understand that ownership had never been the same as love. The arrests did not make the house quieter. For 3 days after the charity reception, Ashborne House had more police cars than guest vehicles in its circular drive. The gilded room closed without ceremony, its gold-lettered sign dark behind the falling snow. Men who had once stood like walls outside its entrance were brought in separately, each discovering that loyalty thinned quickly when charges became real. The dashcam footage from Declan's truck gave Sheriff Owen Callahan the first clean piece. Martha Keene's statement gave him the second. Graham Pell, cornered by the records Clara Whitman produced and the phone logs Owen pulled, gave him the third. Graham did not look like a villain when he finally talked. He looked smaller. He sat in Owen's office with his shoulders bent beneath the same polished coat he had worn to Declan's house. His voice, once smooth enough to close doors, had turned dry and old. He admitted that Preston had ordered him to remove Sterling from the estate under the excuse of behavioral training. He admitted there had been instructions to take the collar. He admitted he had looked away when the men from the gilded room came to collect the dog. "I didn't know they would hurt him," Graham said. Owen did not soften. "You knew he was afraid." Graham closed his eyes. That was answer enough. Preston Ashborne did not confess. Men like him had lawyers before they had regret. But the investigation widened anyway. Attempted coercion, obstruction, misuse of charitable channels, conspiracy to remove property tied to an active estate matter, and animal cruelty by proxy. The words sounded clean on paper. They did not look clean when Declan thought of Sterling pressed into the snow behind a club built on money and silence. At Ashborne House, Richard did not hide from it anymore. He met with Clara in the library Vivian had once used as her private office. The room had tall windows facing the winter garden, where snow gathered on bare rose branches. Vivian's books still lined one wall. And a framed photograph of her and Sterling sat near the desk, the dog bright and proud beside her gloved hand. Richard stood before that photograph for a long time before signing anything. Clara waited without rushing him. "I thought grief gave me the right to disappear," he said finally. Clara's voice was gentle but not forgiving. "It gave you pain, not permission." Richard nodded as if he had deserved the sentence. He signed the supplemental directive Vivian had prepared. The Ashborne Animal Protection Fund would be activated, but not as a polished social project with Preston's name on the invitation cards. Clara structured it independently, with veterinary oversight, emergency response funding, legal aid for animal cruelty cases, and support for shelters that took in stolen or abused dogs. When she later explained the security side to Declan, he almost refused before she finished. "I'm not looking for a job," he said. They stood outside Monroe Veterinary Care, where Sterling was having his bandage checked. Snow moved softly through the afternoon light, settling on Clara's gray coat. "I'm not offering you a job," she said. "I'm asking whether you can help design a system that gets to animals before men like Preston decide no one will notice." Declan looked through the clinic window. Inside, Sterling lay on a blanket while Elise worked near his shoulder. Havoc sat beside the table, calm and watchful. Sterling's eyes were open, but he no longer searched every corner for escape. When Elise adjusted the bandage, he flinched once, then settled after Havoc shifted closer. Declan had spent years avoiding anything that felt like a mission. A mission meant responsibility. Responsibility meant names, faces, the possibility of being too late again. But this was not war. It was not a command channel breaking in his ear. It was not a man calling from white darkness while Declan stood helpless under orders. This was a doorbell, a phone call, a van route, a camera system. And a sheriff who needed faster information, a veterinarian who needed safer transport, ordinary things that could become a line between cruelty and rescue if someone built them right. "I'll advise," Declan said. "That's all." Clara's mouth curved slightly. "For now." The question no one could solve on paper was Sterling. Richard wanted him back, that much was clear. The old man came to the clinic twice, never forcing closeness, never reaching without permission. He brought no expensive gifts, no handlers, no photographers, only himself, quieter each time, sitting several feet away while Sterling watched him with uncertain eyes. Declan respected him for that. He also knew respect did not erase fear, so Clara suggested the only answer that did not begin with ownership: let Sterling choose. The morning they returned to Ashborne House, the snow was light enough to see through. It fell in silver threads over the long driveway, softening the tire tracks left by police cars and service vans. The mansion looked different in daylight, less magical, more human. A large house with too many windows and too many locked rooms. Declan opened the back door of the truck. Havoc jumped down first, then waited. Sterling remained inside for a moment, nose lifted toward the cold air. His shoulder had begun to heal, though the fur there was still uneven and the wound beneath the bandage would leave a scar. Finally, he stepped down. Richard stood near the front steps in a dark coat, his hands empty at his sides. Martha waited near the garden path, eyes red but steady. Clara and Elise stood farther back, giving the moment space. No one called Sterling's name. That mattered. Sterling crossed the driveway slowly, his paws touched the stone at the base of the steps. He lowered his head and sniffed. Then he looked up. At the second-floor window, Vivian's room, the whole group seemed to hold its breath. Sterling sat. For a long while he did nothing else. Richard's face changed as he watched him. And Declan could see the old man understanding something that had no language sharp enough for it. Memory was not the same as safety. Love could live in a place and still not make that place home. Sterling rose at last. He took one step toward the door. Martha covered her mouth. Then Sterling stopped. He turned, not in panic, not in confusion, and looked back toward the truck where Havoc stood in the snow beside Declan. Havoc did not move. Declan did not call. Sterling walked back on his own, not quickly, not desperately, simply with the quiet certainty of a creature choosing the place where his body could breathe. Richard lowered his head. Just when Sterling reached Havoc, the German shepherd touched his nose lightly to the white dog's shoulder. Sterling accepted it. Richard came down one step, then stopped himself. "He can stay with you," he said, voice rough, "as long as he needs. If one day he wants to come here, the door will be open, but I won't ask him to pay for my grief." Declan met his eyes. "That's the first kind thing this house has done for him," he said. Richard absorbed the words, then nodded. By afternoon, Declan's truck pulled back into the small place at the edge of the city. The sky had cleared enough for pale sunlight to touch the snow. Havoc ran ahead across the yard, leaving strong, certain tracks. Sterling followed more slowly, his white coat catching the light, his steps still uneven but no longer shrinking. At the porch, he paused. Declan waited at the bottom step. Sterling looked toward the road, then the house, then Havoc standing in the open doorway. Finally, he came to Declan and pressed his head against the man's leg. No command. No leash, no fear strong enough to pull him away. Declan lowered one hand to the thick fur at Sterling's neck. "You don't have to belong to anyone to be protected," he said quietly. "You just have to be safe." Havoc gave one low breath from the doorway, as if agreeing. Beyond the trees, the city still shone when evening came. And the wealthy street would glow again. Cars would line up. Men would speak softly behind private doors and believe the world could be covered in gold. But somewhere behind those lights, people had started to look harder. And on Declan Ward's porch, beneath a clean fall of winter snow, two dogs stood side by side, one dark and steady, one white and scarred, watching the night without lowering their heads. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is not holding on tighter, but giving someone wounded the freedom to feel safe again. Sterling's story reminds us that kindness is not measured by ownership, wealth, or perfect words. It is measured by what we do when no one is clapping, when something fragile is placed in front of us, and when we have the chance to protect instead of look away. Maybe grace often comes quietly, through an open door, a patient heart, or one small choice to stay. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what part stayed with you. And if you want more stories about loyalty, courage, and second chances, you're welcome to subscribe and walk with us again. May God give you peace tonight, and may He help you notice the ones who need kindness before they have to ask for it.